Good morning. I'm trying something new this morning. There are only 18 slides in this PowerPoint, which means this is either going to be 15 minutes or 55. Well, being a human is a pretty tremendous blessing. And it's as we know, it's not just a state of being. It's actually a goal. That God made humans to human, in other words. He designed humans to be imagers. And we know we fail at that, but we know that God has given us his inspired scripture to help us learn how to be human. And ultimately, he sent his son to show us the right way to human. But for centuries and centuries, God's people have studied the wisdom literature. And the wisdom literature harkens back throughout, poetically so often, back to the garden, back to the two choices, two decisions, which is the tree of life or the tree of knowing right and wrong, or choosing for yourself what is right and wrong. We know that they were only supposed to take of one, and which one was that? The tree of life. And we see that throughout Proverbs, tree of life is referenced numerous times. And in the Proverbs, a beautiful picture is painted between Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. There's two women. Have you ever had two women fight over you? Most of you guys are going to plead the fifth. Well, the scripture frames it in this way in the wisdom literature, that there are two women who are fighting, who are competing for your attention, for you to pay attention to them, and that is Lady Folly and Lady Wisdom. And we have a decision to make who we're going to hearken to. If we hearken to Lady Wisdom, it is a tree of life. And if we hearken to Lady Folly, it's death. And we see that all throughout. So this morning, we're going to look at kind of a collection of Proverbs to give us just some really basics of how to be a good human being or a good God imager. So first, to do that, we're going to talk about the benefit of wisdom. In Proverbs 3, it says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments." Which is interesting. He doesn't just say let your mind keep the commandments, let your hands keep the commandments. There's a place where wisdom needs to dwell within us, in the deepest part of ourselves. Wisdom must reign. Verse 2, "For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you." Now, this doesn't mean that if you're wise, you'll live forever, but you'll certainly live longer than you would have if you lived foolishly. In other words, that there is a blessing that comes with living wisely. And then verse 3 to me is extremely important. "Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart." Kindness and truth. He doesn't just say truth, and he doesn't just say kindness. One is not complete without the other. Just because you're right, and I've said this numerous times, you can be dead wrong, and you can also be dead right. And the Proverbs are going to illustrate this idea, that you must temper truth with kindness. There are two tiers, right? You have to have both. He says in verse 4, "So you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man." I think that's important. Living wisely gains us favor with both God and man. Remember what Jesus said, that all the law and the prophets are fulfilled in what? In the command to love God with every part of your being and to love your neighbor or fellow imagers as yourself. So wisdom helps us accomplish the ultimate purpose of the law and the prophets and of what Jesus came to do, to teach us how to do, to love God with everything, to love each other, to love other people as ourselves. And wisdom makes that a lot smoother. It teaches you how to do that in a better way. In verses 5 through 7, he says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding." I want you to really let the metaphor sink in of leaning. Right? You don't lean against something you don't trust will support your weight, right? Have you ever had that happen? You lean on something that snaps and you take a little tumble, right? That's not a good thing. What is being communicated here is we almost exclusively base our decisions based on our lived experience, right? Well, I've been down that road before, or I've done this, I've done this. This is how the world works. This is how I've always seen it happen. And wisdom is knowing, don't count on that. Because you're a very small speck in a very large universe and a scope of eternity. So trust the one who created it. Trust the one who created all things. Even when God's commands don't match your lived experience or your expectations based on your own thoughts and emotions, Don't trust that. Those things are deceitful. They're fleeting. Trust in the one who created you. He says, in all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. And I put 29 there as well. Who can say, I've cleansed my heart, I am pure from my sin? Because what happens often when we read the Proverbs is we look at the fool and we say, oh, I know someone like that. I've seen that before. Well, the whole point is you don't be the fool. There are moments, my mom would say this all the time when I'd hang out with my friends or go somewhere. She would say, don't be a proverb. Don't be a proverb. Don't be a proverb. I was like, and now I just think about it every once in a while. I was like, am I being a proverb right now? Is this a bad idea to be doing right now? Because the whole point of wisdom literature is not so you can tell everyone else what to do. It's so you have wisdom, so you know how not to act like the fool and how to act like the wise. And I always think it's very important. It doesn't just tell us what the wise does. It also tells us what the fool does. And there's a reason for that, because we can learn from what the fool does as well. We need to know that people have problems. Wisdom is realizing that people have problems. In Proverbs 14:10, it says, the heart knows its own bitterness, and a stranger does not share its joy. You know, no matter how hard I try, I cannot get Hannah to appreciate the intricacies of Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. No matter how many times I play it, no matter how many times, no, listen, that same motif is running throughout this. You know, she's a good sport about it and all. You know, she's like, oh, yeah, it's really good, honey. Yeah, that's good. But she doesn't get the goosebumps I get when I listen to it. I mean, me and my brother used to sit in a dark basement. We'd turn the lights off after we were working, mowing lawns, and we'd just crank that sucker up on the stereo, and we'd just be sitting there listening to it, and we nerd out about it. But Hannah doesn't get that same experience when she listens to it. She's like, old music, I don't like this. In much the same way, our experiences, our highs and lows, other people don't feel them like we feel them. I think we should always be careful of saying, I know exactly what you're going through, because you most likely don't. You may have an idea of what someone is going through, but the same level of sadness, the same profound emptiness, or the same profound joy and ecstasy isn't shared with another person. That's within yourself. And people have these problems. And what wisdom literature teaches over and over is to get us to step outside of ourselves for a moment and realize other people, you know, those moments when you feel really excited about something or you feel real low, yeah, other people have those moments too. And you're not always keen to it. Verse 13, he says, even in laughter, the heart may be in pain, and the end of joy may be grief. Has your world ever felt like it was just absolutely crumbling around you in real time, but you're around people and you're laughing at the jokes, you're going through dinner, making polite conversation, and no one would have a single clue, and you feel like I'm shattered, I'm decimated? Well, wisdom is realizing you don't know where people are. Even though they may seem completely fine, they're smiling, they're laughing, they're talking about their day, it doesn't really signal much. They can be, Thoreau said, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And that's the case for a lot of people. So wisdom is saying, hey, maybe instead of ribbing or jabbing someone, because they seem to be fine, maybe they're not. And maybe you're causing harm by not considering what people may be going through. You don't know. It says in 18:14, the spirit of a man can endure his sickness. Really think about this. When you're sick, right, your internal resolve, when your body's sick, your mind, usually it's a lot of times it works kind of overtime. Now sometimes it can be miserable and it can affect your internal thinking. But in other words, you're still resilient. Like even through my kidney stone, I could still like function and think. I was in a lot of pain, but I was getting through it. But as for a broken spirit, who can bear it? What we feel on the inside can often be worse than the worst physical diseases you can imagine. There's not really a set cure. There's not really a set treatment plan. And it's not immediately evident either. You can't show people and say, hey, here it is. Here's my disease, or here's the symptoms of it. It's this internal crushing that we need to be aware people really go through. Your brothers and sisters, your coworkers, your children, your spouses. This can happen right under your nose and not even be aware of it. In 27:28, it says, as in water face reflects face, so the heart of man reflects man. And I think that's also important. Behavior can often, not always, but is often a signal of what's going on in their lives, of what's going on the inside. And usually if you see people who you know their pattern of behavior, and they're acting out of character, well, guess what? Probably something outside the realm of their normal is happening to them. So maybe instead of, what's wrong with you, and jump in and attack it, maybe you should be like, what's going on? How are you doing? You're acting out of character. So with realizing, wisdom teaches us that people have problems. Other people are going through things, some that we are privy to and other things that we are not privy to, which means that we need to use our words for healing. And wisdom teaches us how to do this. In 12:18, and this goes right along with James. I was thinking about the James class going through this the whole time. In 12:18, it says, there is one who speaks rashly, like the thrusts of the sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. If we don't season our words with kindness, it's like you're walking around stabbing people. Think about that for a second. And when you're speaking, when you're using your words unthinking, it's like you have this wild sword and you're just whipping around indiscriminately, right? Not looking where you're going. We go on autopilot all the time with our tongues. We just kind of say what's on our mind. We say whatever we're thinking. We react however we're going to react based in the moment. But wisdom is realizing this is a sharp tool that can go around stabbing people. But the wise use it for healing. It's that double-edged sword, right? There's a plus and there's a minus to it. In 15:2, he writes, the tongue of the wise makes knowledge acceptable, but the mouth of fools spouts folly. The tongue of the wise makes knowledge acceptable. You know what that means? That means that there is a way to make knowledge unacceptable based on how we present it with our speech. We can dig in our heels and say, I'm right. I'm in the right. But we have to realize that truth does hurt sometimes. You ever been told something that was true that hurt you immensely? Yeah, absolutely. But there's a way to present truth in a way that gets the other party to come on board with you instead of ostracizing them. There's a way, and as Christians, this especially needs to be our theme. We need to become masters of this. We need to know how to speak the truth in love. Speak the truth in a way that's tempered with kindness. Remember, kindness and truth together. That's what wisdom is. That's what ruling with God's wisdom is. And it's not complete without the other. If you just show kindness and never tell the truth, well, guess what? That's not kind. If you just give truth but you never temper it with kindness or love, you're a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. You have to have both together. And so we really need to think about that. Because have you heard that? Well, it doesn't matter. What I said was true. Has anyone ever told you that or said that? Hey, that hurt my feelings. It doesn't matter. It was true. Well, no. There's a way to present the truth in an acceptable way and a way to present the truth in an unacceptable way. And wisdom is knowing how to present it in an acceptable way. And notice this in 15:4. A soothing tongue is a what? Is a tree of life. Now, where do you think that imagery comes from? It's hearkening back that when we use our tongues like, you ever had a really bad sunburn? Like a really bad sunburn? And you can feel like the temperature rising. It hurts to even just have a shirt touching it, everything else. Have you ever gotten like some aloe vera and you just put it on there and it's like instant, like, oh man, I'm not in excruciating pain anymore. That's what our words need to be. Our words need to be aloe vera, right? Because people are hurting. There are people who are sensitive, and keeping that in mind, we shouldn't just say, oh, you're too sensitive. We need to say, hey, I'm going to meet you where you are and use my words for healing as a salve, right? As a healing, a salve. I'll just stick with that. But perversion in it crushes the spirit. I think that's also interesting because I think of this perversion or deception, I think of the serpent, right? that was around the trees. And what does it do? He dragged it down. He dragged creation down. In verse 21 of chapter 15, it says, the wise in heart will be called understanding, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Who would have guessed that? You mean if I don't present the truth like a total jerk and don't care about people's feelings and I actually think about them, I try to phrase my words carefully, truthfully, but kindly, you mean that's more effective than just being blunt? What a crazy notion. What a crazy idea. And of course, that's the old expression. You attract more flies with honey than vinegar, right? There's truth to that. And now think about this image. 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. How many people have died because of words in the history of humanity? How many people have lived? Think about suicide hotlines. How many people have lived because of words spoken? You know, a few years back, I went shooting with the guys, and we should do it again, guys. We went target shooting, and we all had it out, and they were all nervous because I'm a city boy, and I hadn't been around guns, and so they all stood way far back. And that was a pretty good shot, though. I ended up okay. But everyone was real yancy, a little on edge with me there, because why? We were holding loaded firearms, right? We had loaded guns, and guess what? Loaded guns can kill you. What if we treated our words that way? What if we were just as cautious with our words as we were with loaded firearms? Because we should be. In a very literal sense, death and life are in the power of our words. And I don't think we think about that deeply. I think we just kind of go through the day and blurt whatever comes to our little brains, right, that we're thinking or wanting to communicate at the moment. Treat your words like a loaded gun, right? Know when to use it. And on the flip side of that, we can use our words for hurting. In 14:31, it says, he who oppresses the poor taunts his maker, but he who is gracious to the needy honors him. He who mocks the poor taunts his maker. He who rejoices at calamity will not go unpunished. The rich and the poor, and again, these are a collection of verses. You can see the outline right there. The rich and the poor have a common bond. Guess what? We all have in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles, or the Lord will see it and be displeased, and turn his anger away from him. You know what the implication there is? He'll take his focus and anger off that guy and turn it on you because you're exalting yourself above the creation. And this idea of mocking that we see, mocking is not foreign. I mean, going to school, I'm sure you remember your school years, and even in the workplace, there's a lot of mocking that happens. There's the targets, right? You usually get the brunt of the gossiping and the jesting about. But often those who get made fun of are the people who need the most help. And it should be utterly foreign to a Christian to participate in that mockery and that bullying. We should be the ones who stand in and intercede for those people. Even if we don't like them, even if they're our enemies, even if they're annoying. Every human being, however flawed, is still an imager of God. They are still held to that goal. Even those, are you ready for this? Even those of different political parties, even those of different lifestyles, different beliefs, we're all under the same sun. We walk on the same dirt, and we all answer to the same God. He's the creator of both of us equally. So we need to be careful how we treat fellow imagers. And we should never delight in the misfortune of anyone. Anybody. I remember there was I saw that clip it was a while back, of Joe Biden falling off the bike. Did you see that? Oh boy, did I see so many posts just laughing and laughing and laughing. Listen, even if you disagree, you don't rejoice when people fall. That's not how Christians behave. People getting fired that you don't like, you don't rejoice. Scandals with celebrities or people that you can't stand, or politicians that you can't stand. Guess what? You don't rejoice. That should be foreign to a Christian, to one who's living according to God's wisdom, because God is their maker too. And you answer to the same God. And he knows our hearts. He knows what we feel. He knows what we think. He knows what we communicate. And I think, well, we'll get to that in a second. So with that in mind, we need to know when to speak. In 9:7 it says, he who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insult for himself. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will still be wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase his learning. To know when you should speak, you should know who you're speaking to. That's also part of wisdom and discernment. And I love this quote. It's never argue with a stupid person, because they will drag you down to their own level and beat you with experience. I think that's very true. You engage in that infantile thinking to that infantile discourse, and guess what? They're going to mop the floor with you because they're used to being infantile and childish. They're going to beat you with experience. So know who you're communicating to. And again, if it is someone who's a fool or a scoffer, that doesn't mean you compound. That doesn't mean you gossip. That doesn't mean you tear down or rejoice when they fall. It just means that we be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Right? We don't do any harm, but we also have the discernment to protect ourselves from getting into bad situations. And a great rule comes from a Disney movie. If you ain't got nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. I almost did the redneck version of saying, don't say nothing. I was like, okay, so, same thing. Same thing. In 1727, it says, he who restrains his words has what? Has knowledge. And he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. I love that idea. Like, we have the idea of, like, being cool and stuff like laid back. It's like, if you want to have, like, a cool spirit, shut up. Like, just stay quiet a second. Like, don't react to everything. Be calm. Not every moment is a moment to speak, and it's to your benefit. He says, even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent. It's better to let people think you're stupid than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. I think that's very true. We don't always have to say whatever comes to our heads, and we don't have to verbalize every complaint that we have either. You know, those people just like, you know, they walk into the office or whatever, and, manager so-and-so did this, this, and this, or did you hear she did this, or I can't stand these hours, or I'm so tired. People don't care. They don't care, and all you're doing is harming your own reputation. All you're doing is devaluing your own words so that your words hold no weight or no meaning when other people hear it. Use your words as currency, right? They can either gain you glory and reputation in a way that glorifies God and that honors other people, or it makes people just instantly write you off or discount any complaint or gossip that you share or participate in. We also need to be a good friend. Wisdom is knowing to be a good friend. In 17:9 it says, he who conceals a transgression, seeks what? Seeks love. That's what he pursues. But he who repeats a matter separates intimate friends. This again, I think about the garden, that when Adam and Eve, when they're ashamed, they're covering themselves. And what does God do? He atones. He provides atonement. Atonement means covering. He covers their shame, their wickedness that they brought on, right, by their own stupid decisions, right? That's what brought on their shame. But what God did was he interceded and he clothed, he atoned them. And I see that same idea that when we see people, when we have family members, I see this with spouses sometimes. Like a husband or a wife will do something embarrassing in a public setting, and the spouse will be the first one to compound to that embarrassment. That should be foreign to Christians as well. That is not what we do. We atone for each other, not just your spouse, but also your kids. I think so many parents are way too willing to embarrass their children or talk bad about their children. Atone for your child, for crying out loud. That's your child. Atone for your brothers and sisters. We're too quick. You see, he did that. That is not right. Or I'm going to stand up. I'm going to condemn everything. Atone for them, because you're seeking love when you do that. But when you repeat a matter, when you repeat what someone has wronged you or anything else, all you're doing is you're making yourself look like a fool and a gossip, and you're harming them, and all you're doing is tearing down relationships. You're not seeking love. In 1911, it says, a man's discretion makes him slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook a transgression. What's his glory? To just be the biggest bravado, I'm calling out everyone and everything, and I'm still... No, it's to overlook a transgression, to have a cool spirit, a man of understanding, that he overlooks that. Doesn't mean you excuse sin by any means, but you deal it with them in a reconciliation, in a way that reconciles each other, not a one that separates and ostracizes. He says, a good name is to be more desired than great wealth. Favor is better than silver and gold. I think we'd all kind of enjoy being rich, maybe a little bit. At the very, a little bit we'd enjoy being rich. What's even more important is for your words to have weight and to have a good reputation, because that's what it doesn't just benefit you, it glorifies God, because they know the reason why I am this way, the reason why I live this way is because I image God. I image the Son of God who died for me and showed me how to be truly human. He says in 24:11, deliver those who are being taken away to death and those who are staggering to slaughter. Oh, hold them back. If you say, see, we did not know this, does he not consider it who weighs the hearts? And does he not know it who keeps your soul? And will he not render to man according to his work? The overriding theme and mantra during the Nuremberg trials, when many of the Nazi party stood on trial for their war crimes, was, I was just following orders, or I didn't know. I didn't know. I wasn't aware to the extent. You had some idea. It didn't fly in the Nuremberg trials, and guess what? It won't fly with God either. When we stand before judgment and you saw that someone was being harmed, you saw that abuse was occurring, and you looked the other way, pretended not to know, you pretended not to be aware, God, who knows the hearts, will render each one of us according to our works in that regard. And I think that's a somber reminder. But people to make friends with. It says, he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. You're in the wrong room. I think sometimes we enjoy being the smartest in the room because it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like, oh, I know something. Well, you're not going to grow that way, and what's going to happen is everyone's going to get stupider, right? Everyone's intelligence is going to drop if you're the smartest in the room. I love the idea of iron sharpening iron because there's something lost when you sharpen iron against iron, right? There's friction involved with it. There's a give and take. But what happens is you become honed. You become more efficient. And that give and take, that exchange, that you lose something, they lose something, but you both gain efficiency and potency, like you're powerful. You can accomplish more. People to avoid. Again, you still follow the other principles. You're not gossiping about these people or tearing them down, but you are preserving wise as serpents, harmless as doves. A man of great anger will bear the penalty, for if you rescue him, you only have to do it again. They drag you into that cycle of mistake after mistake, of bailing them out and bailing them out. So just know, avoid that. He who goes about as a slanderer reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with a gossip. If someone's willing to tell you someone else's private business, guess what? That same person's willing to tell your private business. So be on guard for that. Do not eat the bread of a selfish man or desire his delicacies, for as he thinks within himself, so he is. He says to eat and drink, but his heart is not with you. If you're going out to eat with someone who you know is a calculating person, and they say, hey, lunch is on me, don't be getting the prime rib. Don't be getting the sweet tea and a side of collard greens, everything. I'll have the chicken tenders, please, and a water, right? That's wisdom. Just avoid those situations, retain your wisdom. Control your emotions. Wisdom teaches us control, self-control. Like a city that is broken into and without walls is a man who has no control over his spirit. Why? Because you let anyone and everything into your personal space. If you have no self-control, if you react to everyone, if you let every word that people say dwell in your heart, your city's overrun, right? Enemies are occupying your very self, your very being. Self-control teaches us their walls, their protections for us. He says a fool always loses his temper, but a wise man holds it back. He who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered exalts folly. Control our emotions. We need to control our actions. Do not say, thus I shall do to him as he has done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. In other words, don't get mad, get even, right? We've heard that before. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Have you found honey? Eat only what you need, that you may not have it in excess and vomit it. I had I used to work at Guitar Center. I was in the drum section. I was in charge of the drum section. I know it logically follows to go from Guitar Center to, like Chick-fil-A, you're like, I see that one. That one jumps a little bit different. I was in charge of the drum section, and there's a guy who worked in the warehouse about my age, and I started to get the feeling he didn't like me very much. Mainly he would make fun of me like in front of everybody and grab people just for random things. He'd put me down. I was in charge. He was a drummer as well, and so I would set up all the displays and everything, and then he would come in behind me and change everything. Like he'd change the order of stuff. He'd retune the drums. He would put different cymbals out and everything else. And he would always be sure to criticize my drumming as well. Like you're slow. And he didn't like me very much. And the problem was I was his enemy, but he wasn't my enemy. So I just, hey, did you change the drums in there? He goes, yeah. I said, man, that was so much better than the way I did it. And he kept doing little stuff like that, and I just kept saying, man, you're such a better drummer than I am, because he was. I wasn't ashamed to admit it. Well, it turns out why he was treating me that way was he was promised the job that I got. And so he didn't feel like I deserved it. He was angry about that. And I just talked to him last week. I mean, this is probably 5 or 6 years ago. And it's just funny because we became very good friends after that. And we talked about it later, and he said, I tried so hard not to like you. He said, I'm surprised you didn't figure it out. I was like, oh, I wasn't even aware of it. I was just kind of, more going about my business. And it's just amazing what happens when you don't let other people's behavior dictate how you're going to treat them. It's such an amazing, and I'm not like saying, oh, I've done this all the time. No, I've been just as petty as other people and been totally childish in other situations. But it just so happened to be the one where I really saw the wisdom in treating your enemies as yourself and praying for them and blessing them. And so avoid conflict. That's another aspect of wisdom. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The first to plead his case seems right until another comes and examines him. Have you ever watched a documentary and then it leads you in a certain path of thinking? You're like, oh man, that guy did it. He's guilty. And then next episode, you're like, oh man, he was framed, right? Like, you just totally go this 180, completely turn around because we're so quick to the first thing that makes sense, we run with it. And by the way, news does that as well. So wisdom is knowing, hey, I'm going to reserve judgment until I understand both sides of things, till I understand what's really going on. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and contentions are like the bars of a citadel. They separate people, and that's why we need to be extra careful with how we speak to our brothers and sisters, our family members, our spouses, because it's difficult to gain that trust back once you break it. Think about what he's saying. It is easier to conquer a fortified city, a fortified walled city. It's easy to take it over than it is to regain trust with a close loved one that you've broken trust with. So that's why we need to have wisdom about it. What is desirable in a man is his kindness, and it is better to be a poor man than a liar. What does it mean? What's desirable in masculinity? Like, is it like strength? Is it power? And the Proverbs here teach us kindness. That kindness and truth, that man of cool spirit. He who guards his mouth and his tongue guards his soul from troubles. I love this. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death, so is the man who deceives his neighbor and say, was I not joking? Do you picture like a crazy man with like spit coming out and wild hair everywhere, just throwing Molotov cocktails all over the place? When you are passive aggressive and you say things, you're like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. That's what you are. You're a crazy person delving out chaos and destruction everywhere you go and trying to guise it under humor or under, oh, I was just messing with you, when there's truth behind it. You're a crazy person. You're a crazy person throwing Molotov cocktails around. For lack of wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, contention quiets down. In order to have a fire, you have to have fuel. There has to be fuel. It's amazing when there's think about what that means for us. Anytime there's contention and there's problem and there's strife between brothers, you know what that means? It's getting fueled. It takes two to tango. It takes two to fuel that fire. So anytime there's contention, you need to stop and think, oh, what's fueling this? How am I contributing to fueling this? Do not go out hastily to argue your case. Otherwise, what will you do in the end when your neighbor humiliates you? This is the idea of as soon as someone wrongs you, you're like, all right, we're going to the judge. We're going to the court. You decide between us. He says, argue your case with who? With your neighbor. Deal with it one-on-one. And do not reveal the secret of another, or he who hears it will reproach you, and the evil report about you will not pass away. Sometimes we're so quick to justify ourselves, or we tend to think of ourselves as always right or always in the right, and other people wronging us. It turns out when you get other perspectives on that, turns out you're not the rose petal you think you are, right? And could it be that possibly you bear some fault in these situations as well? And of course, this is the most important thing. For he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. This is wisdom. But he who sins against me injures himself, and those who hate me love death. In Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Fear of the Lord. We don't like that idea of fear. We don't like the idea of fear. But really, it's the most innate thing that we understand. I mean, I understood fear when I was younger, much quicker than, say, like self-sacrifice or things like that. On a very root level, even my dog understands fear. She's scared of grapes. She's terrified of them, absolutely terrified. So what does it mean, the fear of the Lord? I think of Job. In his suffering, he held on to his integrity, but he has a lot to say about it. He accuses his friends. He's like, you're showing partiality to God. Which is kind of a crazy thing to say. You're just taking God's side because he's God. I've held fast to my integrity. You're a respecter of persons here. And he just says over and over, he's like, yes, God is holy, but I'm right in this. Even if I argued my case, it wouldn't be fair, right? I'm just. And of course, you had the theological posers, the theological wannabes, his friends who were saying, oh, no, Job, if you were just on the right track, everything would be fine. You don't understand. God doesn't do that. See, they put God in a box as well. God wouldn't do that. God doesn't do that. And they're trying to rectify God's actions with their own worldviews. And then God kind of comes down and breaks up the whole party and says, no, it's a dumb question. Stop asking. I'm God. You're not. Ontologically, you have more in common with a worm than with me. I mean, think about it. Worms have a beginning. They're in the ground. They die. We have a beginning. We go to the ground and die. God always is and always was. We have more in common with worms than we do with God. So stop thinking about it. Stop trying to answer and reconcile all these things, because at the end of the day, God's God and you're not. And he has a will. And he knows what's best. He knows what leads to life. And how to have that life is to become a true human, a true imager of God. And we know that we failed in that, and that's what Jesus did. He imaged God perfectly, and he died to bring many sons to glory, to bring them into that we can wear his image, not by right of what we've done, but because of the work that he's done. So in other words, we wear Christ, who truly showed us how to be human. And how do we wear Christ? Well, Galatians 3:27 says that, I just drew a blank. For those who have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. It's the idea of wearing the image of God. And if you want to do that this morning, we ask that you please come forward and be baptized as we stand and sing.